For most of my life, I believed I was broken. Not flawed in the way everyone secretly is, but defective, unstable, a ticking time bomb that people had to manage carefully. At least that's what my own family drilled into me. Whenever I got upset, they'd whisper about my episodes. Whenever I asked too many questions, they'd shake their heads and call me paranoid. Over time, I started to believe them. I thought maybe there really was something wrong with me, something unfixable. The most terrifying part wasn't the label itself. It was how convincing they were. They didn't scream at me or lock me away. No, it was subtler, creepier. Smiles that didn't reach their eyes, words disguised as concern. You're imagining things again. You have such a wild imagination. You know how your mind plays tricks on you. When you hear that from the people who are supposed to love you, you start to second-guess everything. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced I'd heard whispers outside my door. By morning, I couldn't trust myself. Did I dream it? Did it really happen? My family always had the same answer. You're just imagining things. Slowly, I began to doubt the ground under my feet. Every memory, every sensation became questionable. The cruelest part was how alone it made me feel. Friends always talked about trusting their parents, turning to family for comfort. But for me, family was the very reason I couldn't trust myself. And that question, the one that haunted me every day, burned hotter as I grew older. Was I truly crazy, like they said? Or was I the only one who could see the truth? Some kids remember childhood as a blur of cartoons, playground games, and bedtime stories. My memories are different. They're filled with confusion, half-whispered conversations, and the constant ache of being dismissed. I can still recall being 5 years old, wandering into the kitchen late at night because I heard voices. My parents and an older relative were hunched over the table speaking in tense, broken whispers. I caught a word or two, something about keeping it hidden, before they froze at the sight of me. My mom forced a smile and said, "You were dreaming, sweetheart. Go back to bed." But I hadn't been dreaming. I knew what I'd heard. I asked questions the next day, but instead of answers, I got frowns. "You're imagining things again," my dad said, almost coldly, like my curiosity was some kind of shameful disease. From that moment, I learned if I mentioned what I saw or heard, I'd be the problem. It happened again and again. I'd overhear sudden arguments in the hallway that cut off the second I appeared. I'd spot papers shoved quickly into drawers or hear names I didn't recognize. And every time I gathered my courage to ask, I was met with the same rehearsed lines. "You're making things up. Stop being dramatic. You know how your mind works." After a while, I started questioning not them, but myself. The cruel genius of it was how they made me feel like they were protecting me. My mom would stroke my hair and coo, "Your imagination is just a little too wild," like it was something sweet but dangerous. My siblings repeated it like parrots whenever I caught a strange detail. "You're crazy. Stop making stories." I began shrinking under their words, embarrassed. Other kids at school showed off drawings, sang songs, shared stories, and got praised for their imagination. But mine wasn't fun or creative. Mine was sick, scary, something to be ignored. I can remember one afternoon when a neighbor noticed how restless I seemed and asked what was wrong. I blurted out, "Sometimes I think there's a secret in our house." Her eyes softened with curiosity. But before I could say more, my dad appeared, laughing, a little too loudly. "Don't mind her. She's got an overactive imagination," he said, pulling me close with a grip that felt more like containment than affection. The neighbor didn't push, and I shrank in silence, cheeks burning from the humiliation. Those little cracks in childhood forced me to mistrust myself. Every instinct, every gut feeling, I learned to bury deep. If I was sad, it was because I was unstable. If I was suspicious, it was because I was crazy. Slowly, their voices became louder than my own. I stopped asking questions out loud, but inside, the doubt grew like a splinter that wouldn't let go. And though I didn't know it yet, each small dismissal was laying the foundation for years of self-doubt and a distorted reality I could never quite escape. I was 8 years old the first time someone in my family called me crazy outright, without the sugarcoating. Until then, it had always been sly comments, gentle corrections, that subtle edge of dismissal. But this time, it was sharp, loud enough for everyone to hear, deliberate enough that it stuck. It happened one summer afternoon during a family gathering at my grandparents' house. There were relatives everywhere, kids running around, the smell of barbecue clinging to the air. I had been playing tag with my cousins when I slipped inside the house to grab some water. That's when I heard it. My uncle and my dad arguing in the dining room. They were speaking in low voices, but I heard just enough. Something about money being covered up, and no one outside this family must know. My footsteps must have given me away, because the second I stepped closer, the room went silent. I asked the question that had been burning in me. "What are you hiding?" My uncle's face contorted into shock and then fury. My dad gave me this warning glare that sent shivers down my spine. But before I could retreat, my uncle barked, "This kid isn't. It's right in the head, always making up stories." His words struck like a slap. The room erupted. A couple of relatives chuckled uncomfortably. Others nodded as if it explained everything. "She's got that overactive mind," one of my aunts added with a smirk, "always seeing shadows where there are none." Suddenly, everyone was laughing, and I was standing there like a clown in the center of the ring. My cheeks burned and my throat ached. But the worst part was looking at my mom. She sat by the corner, lips pressed together, eyes downcast. She didn't laugh, but she didn't defend me either. I wanted to argue, to scream that I had heard them, that I wasn't imagining things. But when I opened my mouth, the sound was drowned by more snickers. Someone muttering, "Poor thing," and a cousin whispering, "She's crazy." The label stuck to me instantly, like glue. I ran outside, blinking away tears, but even the kids noticed. They teased me for being the crazy cousin, chasing me around the yard as if it were a game. I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me whole. I pressed my hands over my ears, but I couldn't block it out. Crazy, not right in the head. It was everywhere now, consuming me. That day was the first time the mask of family unity broke open for me. It was my first clear memory of being cast as the problem, not because of what I did, but because I dared to notice. And standing there, humiliated while the adults laughed and my mother stayed silent, I realized something horrifying. It didn't even matter if I told the truth. The story had been written for me, and I was powerless to erase it. By the time I hit my teenage years, the crazy label had already settled on me like a second skin. I didn't even have to do anything wrong. If I cried too hard after a bad grade, my dad would sigh and mutter, "See? Unstable." If I got angry when my siblings mocked me, they'd roll their eyes and say, "There she goes again." No matter what I did, my emotions were weapons they used to prove I was broken. It wasn't long before the whispers followed me outside the house. My parents, under the guise of concern, started telling teachers that I had emotional struggles. At first, I didn't know. I couldn't figure out why teachers looked at me differently with that wary glance like they were waiting for me to erupt. It wasn't until one pulled me aside and asked if I was coping okay at home that I realized my family had painted me as unstable to the world, not just inside four walls. Their gaslighting had grown tentacles. The fallout hit hard in friendships too. Middle school was already brutal, people tearing each other down to feel like they belong. Add in rumors that you're the weird or crazy one, and you're marked for life. I remember walking into class and hearing whispers behind me, kids giggling, "Don't sit too close." Eventually, I stopped trying. I ate alone at lunch more often than not, convincing myself it was safer that way. Better to isolate myself than to risk them confirming what had already been drilled into me. The worst part was how I began to believe it. Anytime I felt too much, sadness, anger, even happiness, I immediately questioned myself. Was I overreacting? Was I imagining? Was I losing grip on reality? I started carrying a notebook where I wrote down daily events with timestamps, as if I needed evidence of my own life. That was how warped I had become, too afraid to trust my memory, desperate to have proof that I wasn't insane. At home, my voice disappeared completely. I barely spoke at the dinner table, avoided eye contact, and shut myself in my room as soon as I could. My mom occasionally slipped in a soft, "Don't listen to them," but even her comfort felt useless when she let their words stand unchallenged. It was easier for her to let me bear the weight than to spark another eruption with my dad. So the silence grew thicker, suffocating me more each day. By the time high school rolled around, I was a shadow of myself. I wasn't the girl who asked questions or stood tall. I was quieter, colder, petrified of showing any feeling that could be turned against me. Deep down, I wanted to scream that I wasn't broken, that I wasn't crazy, but the louder that urge grew inside me, the more trapped I felt, smothered by the straitjacket of the identity they'd forced on me. And soon, I wasn't just fighting against them, I was fighting against myself. Even though I spent most of my teen years trying to silence myself, some things were impossible to ignore. It was like no matter how hard I tried to swallow the crazy narrative they fed me, reality kept slipping through the cracks. Little moments, small inconsistencies, they built up slowly until I couldn't shake the feeling that my instincts weren't wrong. Something really was being hidden. It was the late night arguments first. My room was right above the living room, and sometimes I'd wake at 2 a.m. to the sound of raised voices. They weren't ordinary family spats about money or chores. These were urgent enough to make the walls vibrate. I'd creep down the stairs only for the voices to cut off instantly, as though a switch had been flipped. If I walked into the room, no one made eye contact. My mom would fake a yawn and say, "Go back to sleep, sweetheart, you're dreaming," even though I could still feel the tension in the air like static. Then I began noticing how quickly things disappeared when I entered a room. I'd walk into my dad's office and catch him stuffing papers into drawers. I'd step into the kitchen and find my siblings scattering like I'd interrupted a crime scene. On more than one occasion, I saw envelopes, thick ones with official stamps lying on counters, only to vanish when I passed through again minutes later. Every time I got close, it was hidden, destroyed, or explained away. Imagining things again, they'd tease, like clockwork. Even family gatherings carried this strange undercurrent. Relatives would huddle together, speaking seriously, but the minute I approached their circle, the energy shifted. They'd break apart fast, slipping into forced jokes and hollow smiles. Once, I clearly heard my aunt whisper, "She must never find out." But when I confronted her, she tapped her temple and laughed. "See what I mean? Unstable." unstable. The others chuckled, and the room swallowed me in humiliation again. At first, I told myself I was just sensitive, that maybe my brain really was manufacturing suspicion out of thin air. But how was I supposed to ignore the way their eyes darted, the nervousness that hummed under their voices? Reality doesn't vanish just because someone tells you to stop paying attention. If anything, being told not to notice only sharpened my senses more. One night sealed it for me. I came home earlier than expected from a friend's house. As I pushed open the door, I caught my parents and my older brother huddled around the dining table. A folder lay open, filled with faded photographs and documents. I stepped closer, but they noticed me before I could see. My dad shoved everything into the folder so fast one photo fluttered to the floor. It was black and white, clearly old, showing a young woman holding a baby. My mom snatched it up before I could touch it. Her face went pale. "What did you see?" she demanded. My throat went dry. "Nothing," I whispered, though both of us knew that wasn't true. She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes almost panicked, before she softened it into a smile. "You've got to stop imagining things, sweetheart." That was when I realized this wasn't paranoia. This wasn't just in my head. The looks, the documents, the hushed arguments, they were too deliberate, too consistent. They wanted me to believe I was crazy so I wouldn't dig further. But my instinct has screamed louder than their gaslighting. There was a secret, and it was big enough that my entire family would rather destroy my mind than let me uncover it. The more I pushed, the harsher their reactions became. It started small. Deflections, laughter, that sickly sweet tone people use on little kids who are confused. But by the time I was 17, the act wasn't polite anymore. It was brutal. If I so much as asked, "What were you talking about just now?" my dad's eyes would harden. He'd slam the table and growl, "Do you want people to think you're insane? Keep it up and I'll drag you to therapy myself." It wasn't an offer of help. It was a threat, sharpened with ridicule. The way he said therapy made it sound like prison, like a place they could dump me if I didn't play obedient. My siblings latched onto it instantly, parroting his words in sing-song voices. "Careful, or you'll be locked up for being crazy." They turned it into a game, mocking me whenever I suggested I'd seen or heard something unusual. It chipped away at me every day, grinding my confidence to dust. But what dug deepest was how they controlled the world beyond those walls. My mom reminded me constantly, "Never repeat these lies in public. Do you want to humiliate us?" If I tried to tell a friend about overhearing an argument, she hissed in private, "Do you want people to pity you? They'll think you're not stable." Her words drilled into my brain until I hesitated every time I wanted to open my mouth. What scared me most wasn't just how they dismissed me, but how they weaponized my emotions. If I raised my voice in frustration, my dad shook his head. "See? Unstable." If I cried out of sheer hurt, my brother smirked. Classic. She's losing it again. Every reaction, every tear, even my silence became twisted evidence that I was the problem. They turned my humanity into proof of my instinct. Needy. Soon, I didn't even bother confronting them. The cycle was too predictable. I'd ask, they'd deny. I'd protest, they'd call me unstable. I'd cry, and they'd use the tears as ammunition. I felt myself disappearing, collapsing into the role they had written for me. A girl who shouldn't be trusted. A daughter who embarrassed her family. A fragile mind dangling by a thread. The irony was, I knew exactly what they were doing, but their manipulation still worked. Even when I screamed in my head, "It's them, not me," a darker whisper always followed. What if they're right? What if this really is all in your head? That was the true poison of their gaslighting. It wasn't about silencing my questions. It was about making me silence myself. And slowly, painfully, it was working. It finally happened when I was 18, the moment I broke, completely and publicly, the exact way my family had been predicting all my life. Until then, I'd managed to bottle things up, burying my nerves under fake smiles and long sleeves pulled over shaky hands. But repression isn't the same as control. Eventually, the weight was too much. It was a history class presentation of all things. My group had been assigned a project, nothing huge, but the stress gnawed at me for weeks. I didn't sleep the night before, tossing around with whispers of my dad's voice in my head. Unstable, unstable, unstable. That morning, I stood in front of the class, clutching index cards as if they could anchor me. Halfway through, I froze. My voice crumbled around words I couldn't push out. Then panic surged. I dropped the cards, my heart hammering so loud I thought the room could hear it. And then I snapped. I started muttering, then yelling about how everyone was watching me, how everybody thought I was crazy because my family made it true. Tears blurred my vision, my chest tightened, and I screamed louder. Desperate, humiliating. The teacher rushed over. Classmates stared in horror. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, she really lost it." In that instant, I watched my family's prophecy become public fact. Everyone believed what they said about me. By the time I reached home, the story had traveled faster than I could have imagined. My mom didn't ask if I was all right. She just sighed. "We told told you this would happen if you didn't control yourself." My dad smirked like he had won a long game. "Unstable," he murmured, almost satisfied. My siblings snickered behind their hands. I had finally, in their eyes, proved them right. The weeks after were a blur. I slid into depression so thick it felt like quicksand. I stopped leaving my bed, skipped meals, ignored my phone. When friends reached out, I ghosted them. I was terrified they saw the same label in me that my family did. Every time I opened my eyes, the image of that classroom replayed. The shock, the whispers, the certainty that I truly was broken beyond repair. And the cruelest part? A part of me believed it. I thought maybe they'd been right all along. Maybe I was unstable, defective, someone who didn't deserve trust or love. The words circled like vultures above my head, whispering, "Crazy, crazy, crazy." I started cutting off pieces of myself just to shrink any possibility of being too much, talking less, crying less, existing less. But in the quietest moments, when the house was still and even my thoughts seemed muffled, something stirred. I'd stare at the ceiling, hearing echoes of all the times I'd been told I imagined things. And the question would creep in. If I was so unstable, why did their stories always shift when I asked for details? Why did their arguments always stop the second I appeared? Why did their eyes look panicked whenever I stumbled on something I wasn't supposed to see? That thin spark of doubt didn't erase the pain, but it was enough to hold on to. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't losing my mind. Maybe they wanted me to believe I was, and if that was true, then there was only one way forward. I had to find out what they were hiding. After the breakdown, something hardened inside me. I was done being their puppet, done letting them control the very air I breathed. If they wanted me to believe I was crazy, then fine, but I wasn't going to die wondering what they were hiding. I needed the truth, even if it shattered me. It started with small acts of defiance. While my parents thought I was still sulking in my room, I began quietly paying attention again. Their eyes, their whispers, the way their voices always dropped when they thought I wasn't listening. I wrote everything down in my notebook, not the paranoia anymore, but actual details. Times of night, who was in the room, words I managed to catch. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to look less like my imagination and more like a cover-up. One night, the opportunity came. My parents had gone out and my siblings were glued to their screens upstairs. The house hummed with that rare kind of silence that feels dangerous, like it knows you're about to do something you shouldn't. I crept into my father's study, the one room I'd always been warned away from. My hands shook as I pulled open drawer after drawer, rifling through tax forms and neatly stacked folders. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought I'd find nothing, that I truly was losing my grip. Then I noticed the file cabinet in the corner. Its top drawer had a lock, but the second seemed slightly bent. I yanked it open, and that's when everything spilled out. Old photographs and legal documents crammed tight as if somebody had hurried to hide them years ago. My fingers trembled as I flipped through them, my breath catching on every page. There were birth certificates, 2 of them, my name on one, and another with a different name, scrawled in the same handwriting, dated 2 years before mine. A sibling I had never been told about. The photo stopped me cold, a young woman holding a tiny baby, her eyes filled with exhaustion and fear. It wasn't my mother, but the surname on the birth certificate matched ours. My father's name filled the parent line, undeniable in its ink. My lungs squeezed like I'd forgotten how to breathe. All the late-night arguments, the frantic whispers, the words, "She must never find out," it all came into focus. My family had been hiding the existence of my father's first child, a daughter erased from history, an affair, a child abandoned, a situation so scandalous that rather than face it, they rewrote reality and fed me the lie that I was unstable whenever I got too close to the truth. I stumbled back, clutching the papers, the betrayal slicing deeper than anything before. It wasn't my imagination, it wasn't paranoia. They had gaslit me for years, stealing my innocence and rewriting my identity just to bury a secret that didn't even belong to me. The thought swallowed me. They would destroy my mind before they'd admit what they'd done. I was never the crazy one. I was the inconvenient one, the truth teller, the living risk. They decided it was easier to brand me unstable than confront the shame of the child they hid from the world. In that moment, I realized my life had never truly been mine. It had been a stage play directed by my family, lines rehearsed, scripts forced, reality torn apart for the sake of maintaining their image. And now the curtain had lifted, and I could finally see what was hiding behind it. I didn't wait. The moment I pieced it together, the rage inside me burned too hot to contain. For years, I had been their scapegoat, the unstable one, the broken toy they dragged around to keep everyone else from noticing the cracks in their perfect facade. But now I had the truth. I had the document. Yes, the photos, the evidence of their betrayal clutched in my shaking hands. I stormed into the living room that night. My parents and siblings looked up, startled, like I had just shattered their sleep. My father's voice tried for authority. "What's wrong with you now?" But he went pale when I slammed the folder onto the table. Papers spilled everywhere. Birth certificates, photos, the undeniable proof that I wasn't inventing shadows. Silence thickened the air. "Who is she?" My voice trembled but didn't break. I pointed at the photo of the woman and baby. "Who is this child you erased? How long were you planning to gaslight me so I never figured it out? How long were you going to rob me of my sanity just to cover your lies?" My mom immediately tried to gather up the papers, her hands frantic. "Stop! You don't understand, don't I?" I cut her off, my voice rising. "I understand perfectly. You made me question my memory, my emotions, my mind, my entire existence. Because you thought it was easier to call me crazy than admit the truth. Do you know what that does to a child? Do you know what it's like to grow up hating yourself because of your shame?" My siblings were frozen, wide-eyed. My father sat stiff as stone, then mumbled weakly, "You shouldn't have seen this." It was the closest he had ever come to acknowledging I wasn't delusional, and that was the final crack in their story. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound I barely recognized as my own. Shouldn't have seen? I should have known? I deserve to know. My throat tightened, but the words poured out like floodwater. "You stole my childhood just to protect him. You convinced the world I was unstable. You silenced me, mocked me, broke me. And for what? A secret you were too weak to own up to?" Their excuses tumbled on top of each other. My mother begging me softly not to ruin the family. My father finally raising his voice with useless denials. My siblings asking me to calm down, but nothing they said mattered anymore. The balance had shifted, and for the first time I felt it in my bones. I wasn't the powerless child anymore. I had the truth, undeniable and unshakable, and truth is the one thing they couldn't twist against me. I stood there, shaking but unbroken, while they scrambled in panic. They weren't in control now. I was. The aftermath was like tossing a match into a room full of gasoline. Everything exploded at once. My father jumped to his feet, red with fury, shouting that I was tearing the family apart. My mother dissolved into frantic sobs, begging everyone to calm down, her hands shaking as she tried to gather the evidence off the table like she could stuff years of secrets back into a folder. My siblings splintered instantly, one of them accusing me of being dramatic, the other whispering, almost in awe, so she was right all along. It was chaos. Years of hidden resentments boiled to the surface, spilling into the room like poison smoke. My father screamed at my mom for not hiding things better. My mom snapped back that she'd been the one carrying his shame for decades. One sibling accused her of treating us all like pawns, while the other turned their anger directly on him for lying to us our entire lives. What started as me confronting one secret exploded into the family, unraveling right in front of my eyes. And there I was, standing in the center, clutching the photo like a shield. The words crazy and unstable felt foreign now, like they didn't belong to me anymore, because no one could deny the evidence pinned to the table between us. For the first time ever, they weren't questioning me, they were questioning themselves, each other, the story they had all agreed to live in. The spell was broken, and they couldn't shove me back into the role they'd written for me. But liberation didn't come without pain. Seeing my parents crumble, hearing my siblings argue, it felt like the roof over our lives was caving in. My mother's tears turned to accusations, hissing that I was cruel for exposing wounds that were better left closed. My father turned his chair away and muttered how I had ruined everything, as if I was the one who created the mess, not him. Even in their unraveling, they tried to pin the destruction on me. And yet, I didn't feel destroyed. Shaken, yes. Heartbroken, yes. But ruined? No. For once, the narrative wasn't against me. All those years of doubt, all the nights I thought I was collapsing into madness, I finally saw the truth for what it was. They had needed me to play the crazy one so they could keep their secret intact. And now, that role was dead, gutted, ripped away by facts they couldn't deny. The family would never be the same. Maybe it would never heal. But as the fighting raged, I stepped back into a new kind of silence. Not the suffocating silence of being dismissed, but the quiet realization that they'd never gaslight me again. Because now I knew, and knowledge, painful as it was, had set me free. In the days after the confrontation, the house felt like a war zone that had already burned down. Nobody spoke in the same way anymore. My parents tiptoed around me, my siblings quietly picked sides, and the old rhythm of our family evaporated. Strangely, instead of despair, I felt a calm I had never known. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trapped in their story. Yes, the truth was ugly, but it was real, and real was so much better than living in a lie. I stopped replaying their words in my head, unstable, dramatic, crazy, because I knew now they weren't reflections of me, they were weapons. Tools they used to keep me silent, to chain me in self-doubt so I wouldn't stumble into the truth they were terrified of. Once I understood that, everything shifted. Their lies didn't live inside me anymore. They sat outside, heavy and rotten, belonging to the Ajuad. Hem, not me. I won't lie and say it didn't hurt. Seeing my mother's betrayal, my father's cowardice, my siblings' confusion, it cut deep. The family I once hoped would heal me was fractured beyond recognition. But in that very fracture, I found freedom. I didn't need their recognition to define me. I didn't need their approval to prove I wasn't broken. I had carried myself through years of gaslighting and humiliation, and still, here I was, whole, breathing, stronger than they ever thought I could be. I started writing again, not that panicked journaling where I questioned my own reality, but honest words. My story, my experiences, my reality. Seeing ink spill out the truth made me feel in control for once. It was my voice, undisputed and unapologetic. I reclaimed what they had stolen, the right to believe in myself. And that became the redemption I never expected. Not a perfect happy ending, not a magically healed family, but something better. A clear understanding that my worth was never theirs to decide. They called me crazy, but I was the one who saw clearly. They tried to crush me with a lie, but I grew stronger lifting myself above it. The scars are still there, yes, but instead of shame, I carry them like proof of survival. Proof that no amount of betrayal or manipulation can erase who I am. They can mark me with lies, but they can't define me with them. Only I can do that. So I choose this. To walk forward unchained, to leave their secrets in their hands, and to carve a life where honesty, even when it hurts, will always be better than silence. They once told me I was crazy, but in the end, the truth revealed exactly the opposite. I'm not broken. I'm free.